Good morning. My name is Neil Pillar, and I'm chair of the Lay Clergy Institute, and I would like to welcome you to part 2 of the 27th edition of the Lay Clergy Institute. I'd like to give some quick thanks to people who are responsible for bringing this to you. Of course, Michael Leidy and Ann Keir, our ministers, have been great help to us. My co-committee members, Wayne Moore and Diane Groff. Bill Decker and Hugh Keir, who have done yeoman work up on sound and video. Marilyn Decker and Priscilla Prees in the office, who did a tremendous job in getting publicity out for us. My wife, Cindy Pillar, who spent hours putting publicity together. Al and Nancy Dworick, who graciously opened their home for us last night to have a celebration dinner with Reverend Jim Wallis. Lee Flanders for the wonderful article she wrote in the Times Call. Chris and Rob Tate for the music they're providing to us this morning. Melissa James, who you'll be hearing from later on this morning, and our guest trumpeters. We thank them very much as well. We are welcoming this morning Reverend Jim Wallis from Washington, D.C., and we thank him for taking the time to squeeze us in among his some 200 speaking engagements that he goes to every year, as well as counseling the political candidates and how to conduct themselves a little bit more properly in the future. We welcome him and we thank him for his thoughts this morning and last night. Those who were here last night for the presentation know that you heard a very provocative and thought-inspiring evening. Those who were here also know that the answer is blowing in the wind. Those who weren't here will be glad to know that you can watch the videotape of last night's presentation to know what that means. If after listening to Reverend Wallis this morning, you believe that alleviation of poverty in our country is a worthy cause, then you have the opportunity to contribute to the program called Call to Renewal, which is one of Reverend Wallis's programs in which he's engaged. There are pamphlets out in the library lounge with opportunities to send in donations to Call to Renewal, and we invite you to pick up that information and, if you are so moved, to contribute to the cause. Also, Reverend Wallis's books are on sale in the library lounge at cost after the service today. And if you would like to explore his thoughts and philosophy in more detail, we invite you to purchase one of those as well. I would like to apologize in advance for the fact that we may have to leave early from the service today. As you know, those people who have flown east realize that it's an all-day encounter to get from DIA to the East Coast. So we're fighting a very close time schedule this morning, and it may be necessary for us to leave before Reverend Wallis would really like to have the chance to meet all of you. In Reverend Wallis, we have with us today a man who is perhaps in a unique position in terms of making a significant impact in our country and potentially the world in alleviating poverty. And I would just like to read a short statement that was written by Richard E. Stearns, president of World Vision. At the end of a decade of the greatest growth in prosperity, how can it be that more people than ever are living below the poverty line? Jim Wallis challenges us all to examine this question and calls us to make a lifetime changing commitment to serve the poor in the name of Christ. Reverend Jim Wallis.
Neil already wished you good morning, but you didn't answer him back, so I'll try again. Good morning. That's for both of us, Neil. Good morning. I am very glad to be here. I really enjoyed last night, and I want to thank Neil and Cindy and Ann and Michael and the committee and all those who made this possible, and Melissa for her wonderful music, which we'll hear from later in this service. I'd like to begin with a story. It's an old favorite of mine, but it came to me again this morning. The story is about a young man studying to be a priest, and he's very nervous about his new responsibilities. He's nervous especially about that first liturgy in the Catholic tradition. Of course, he has his part of saying things like, "The Lord is with you," and the congregation responds, "and also with you," and then it goes on from there, and he's afraid he's going to get his parts wrong as a new priest. And then if he did, they'd get their parts wrong, And the whole thing would fall apart, and everybody would think he was a failure as a priest. So he was very, very nervous on that first morning to do his first Eucharistic liturgy. And he arrives at the altar, and there's a microphone, and he realizes the microphone has gone completely dead, flat dead, and then he really panics. Now, the congregation is waiting just like you are, and so here's this young, nervous priest tapping the microphone wildly and says, "Something is wrong with this microphone." And the congregation responded, "And also with you." It's a true story. And I thought I'd like to begin there because indeed something is wrong. Even both presidential candidates in both parties are now saying we have this persistent problem of poverty in the midst of prosperity. Something is wrong. We have an unprecedented economy and yet rising inequality at the same time. The old slogan, "The rising tide's lifting all the boats," is not true of this prosperity. It's rather the rising tide is lifting all the yachts. And not all the boats yet. So last night we went through some of that and talked about how I was in Denver in the spring, and I learned in Denver that you have to work 97 hours a week at minimum wage to afford any kind of housing, affordable housing. This is a problem, and it's not just a problem of the left or the right. As a friend of mine, dear friend of mine who's a stockbroker and investment counselor and a very wealthy man says, "This is just crazy," he says. "Something is terribly wrong." I read a United Nations statistic. Stats, I think, fail to move us a lot, but this one kind of grabbed me. It said the 3 richest families in the world today, I think it's the Gates family, the Walton family, and the Sultan of Brunei, I believe. Those 3 families have more wealth than the 48 poorest countries in the world today. Now these kinds of great and growing gaps are something that has to be dealt with. But then I recall this morning, last night I told you the story of my 6-year-old conversion in my little evangelical church on a Sunday night when a fiery revival preacher scared me into faith. He just scared me to death. And I became a Christian. And you know what? It didn't hold up. It didn't hold up over the years. So I wondered overnight if some people might have a similar response to someone like me coming to speak and preach, the social activist, like the fiery revival preacher. "Oh, we're going to feel guilty after this one. Oh, I know I'm going to have to do something now. Find the time. Where am I going to find the time to do one more thing that I know I ought to be doing, but afterwards," and Neil promised you all there'd be no altar call last night. Sighs of relief sprung up all over the place. But even with no altar call, you sit there, "I guess I'm going to have to do something." Well, you know what? I've learned that the acting out of guilt or even of a whole string of oughts and obligations won't hold up. Like being scared into faith, being guilt-tripped into action doesn't hold up. The title of my sermon this morning is not about guilt. Not even about new obligations or things you should do in that 45 minutes you could squeeze out of your week. The title is, "We All Get Healed." We all get healed. I believe we need solutions to this great and yawning gap between God's children. And yes, some of that will be social, political, and economic. We are pushing both candidates in both parties to try and deal with this issue, but I think the solution finally at root will be a spiritual one. And I think of the changes in national direction and policy, there must be a spiritual foundation to it all. And so, that's what I'd like to speak to you about this morning. What is this prosperity for? Does it have any purpose? Is it the occasion to forget about those left behind, or the opportunity to include? I travel on campuses across the country, and I find students, they're volunteering. These kids today, they're volunteering in record numbers. They're tutoring inner city kids. They're giving up their beer-drinking spring breaks in the sun to go build houses with Habitat for Humanity. I teach at Harvard on Mondays, and my students you work hard at Harvard. These kids, they're smart, but they work hard. And after their break, after their fall semester, they get in the car and tear down to Americus, Georgia, and do the Easter Bill with Habitat for Humanity. Work hard all week, get back in the car, drive back to Cambridge, and back at school. Now, why are students volunteering in greater numbers, far greater, than what is necessary for a balanced resume? Why? I asked them why. And when I ask, they come back with two words. Always hear these two words: meaning and connection. They're looking for meaning. They're looking for connection. Here's a newsflash. Shopping does not satisfy the deepest longings of the human heart. I know it's a shock. But the young people who've been offered endless consumption, piling up more and more things, they're not finding what they're looking for in all of it. They are discovering, in my view, they are discovering the wisdom of Isaiah. Any social movement, like the civil rights struggle, or any social movement that makes a difference in the world generally has a spiritual foundation. And I believe as we start the beginning of a new millennium, it will be spiritual energy and spiritual power that transforms, yes, even our social and our political lives. That's sometimes hard for us to believe because we've seen for so long either a kind of spirituality that is limited to a private piety in churches. You know, where it's sort of a kind of a spirituality, I've got it and you don't, but call this number and you can get it for a small donation. Or the new kind of spirituality, which is, all the Barnes & Noble books and tapes and here's a weekend with so-and-so. Spirituality becomes a commodity. A new kind of self-help movement, and it's something else we have to buy to get ourselves balanced and whole and happy and prosperous. But nonetheless, I think we're going to see a connection more and more between the two most powerful forces in our society moving and growing. One is service and one is spirituality. Two streams flowing in the society that I see more and more coming together. And Isaiah got this figured out a long time ago. Listen to what Isaiah says. Is this not the fast, Isaiah says the Lord requires, to loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, to break every yoke? The prophet's call here for a direct personal involvement is as contemporary as if it was written yesterday. Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house? When you see the naked, to cover them, and not to hide yourself from your own kin, or a better translation of that is from your own flesh, from your own brothers and sisters, from your own children. I believe that I live 20 blocks from the White House, where the kids go to bed to the sound of gunfire at night, 20 blocks from the White House. And those kids' lives would be completely different if the rest of America regarded those kids as their kids. It's not a matter of a bunch of different social policy initiatives. It's we wouldn't let that happen to our kids. Whose kids are they? You see, is the spiritual question. Isaiah says, not hide yourself from your own kin. Now, so far, Isaiah is talking about social justice and social action and bringing the homeless poor into your house and all that. And you've heard that before, but then Isaiah turns, and this is where it really gets interesting. Isaiah says, then shall your light break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up speedily. Notice he's not saying their healing, those who you bring into your house and the poor and the homeless. No, he's saying your healing is at stake in all of this. Isaiah is making a profound point lost in self-help America today, which is the path to genuine healing and self-fulfillment is the journey that connects us to other people and especially to those who have been marginal. Listen to Isaiah here. The conventional wisdom says the opposite. How often do we hear people say, or say ourselves, something like, I'd like to get involved in some kind of service, but first I got to get my life together. Isaiah is saying, and the college students are finding, the best way to get your life together is to do something for your brother or your sister, that inner city kid or that family that can't afford a house. Do something for them, and your light will break forth like the dawn, and your healing can speed up, rise up, spring up. In fact, Isaiah says to focus only on yourself and your own needs could be a great obstacle to real satisfaction. So in Barnes & Noble, Isaiah is saying, save your money. Save your money and reach out to the one who's left outside. Now, if you just work on getting your own life together, you may never succeed in doing so. Then Isaiah goes on to describe a kind of human fulfillment. This begins to sound like a self-help book in Barnes & Noble. Listen to what he says. This would excite the appetite of any self-help enthusiast. If you offer your food to the hungry and satisfy the needs of the afflicted, then your light shall rise in the darkness and your gloom be like the noonday. The Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your needs in parched places. You got some parched places? I've never been with a congregation of people that haven't had lots of parched places. No matter what zip code they live in, no matter what their income is, no matter what their jobs are like, we got parched places in our lives. Isaiah is saying, God wants to satisfy your needs in your parched places. He's not talking here about the homeless or the poor or the inner city kid. He's talking about your parched places. God cares about that. And God's saying, here's how we're going to satisfy those needs. It'll make your bones strong. You'll be like a watered garden, like a spring of water whose waters never fail. I was up this morning and reading, and I turned on the TV, and of course, Robert Schuller was on, Crystal Cathedral. And this is the way, and I know Bob Schuller, this is the way he talks. He talks about being a water, you know how that great 74-year-old voice, you'll be a watered garden whose waters never fail. Well, that's good stuff, but this is the way it happens. Your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt. You'll raise up the foundations of many generations. You'll be called the repairer of the breach and the restorer of streets to live in. Isaiah's image of both personal and social healing is one of the most powerful in all spiritual literature. The connection between the two is crucial. Here is the bridge between self-help and social action that so many in our society are looking for. Here is the link between personal growth and social responsibility. And guess what? It's a spiritual bridge. It's a spiritual connection. If you do these things, says Isaiah, then you'll reap the harvest of healing. Or as I say in a chapter in the book, if you do the work, you find the Spirit. Do the work, and you find the Spirit. If you act in justice, you'll know the healing that comes from reconnection. But you can't have one without the other. Now, here's how it works practically. We have a place called the Sojourners Neighborhood Center. It's in that neighborhood where all the kids are growing up with gunfire. So in that little center, it's a tiny place, but it is really a little beacon of hope in that neighborhood of drugs and despair and violence and everything. The economic boom hasn't arrived yet, let me just say that, in our neighborhood. People aren't sort of aware of how their lives have changed. But in that center, there's a 19-year-old sophomore from Howard University, young black college student. She's tutoring and mentoring an 8-year-old little girl off the streets, what they call in D.C. a child at risk, meaning she lives in Washington, D.C. And so the 19-year-old is mentoring the 8-year-old, and here's what happens. That 8-year-old little girl looks at that 19-year-old and says, she's a black woman, just like I'm going to be. She's smart. She's in college. She likes me, I can tell. She thinks I'm smart. She thinks me, could go to college. Maybe I will. Maybe I will. The 19-year-old looks at that little girl and says, this kid is changing my life. These are the best 2 hours of the week that I spend with her. That's when I feel my life has some meaning or purpose. I feel so much better about myself when I'm with her. And you know, being with her this year has made me think about what I'm studying and what I'm doing and what my plan is for my life. I don't want to just be prosperous and successful. How can I do something in my life that makes a difference in the lives of kids like hers? Now, what's happened there, you see, is no longer is somebody doing something for somebody else. That's the old paradigm. They just do for. Carve out a little bit of time here so I feel less guilty. Do for, and I'm doing, and I'm feeling. No. There's a transaction going on. A transformation is going on. A relationship has been established, and both, that 19-year-old college sophomore and that 8-year-old little girl, both are being changed. Both are being transformed. Their lives are being set on different trajectories because of that relationship. Now, you take that dynamic and you scale it up to a society. You repeat that millions and millions and millions of times, and what you got is social change. Now, it takes all that we talked about last night. It takes new direction and new policy, and we're talking with Mr. Bush and Mr. Gore about that. But if it's not undergirded by that kind of spiritual change, we're just talking about politics. We're just talking about politics. Spiritual transformation always undergirds real social change. Or, I remember one day, one of our members in the community, a young person who came to be with us, is now a Methodist pastor, and he's got this great church called Rising Hope. It's a wonderful place, and I went there to preach one morning, and I preached from this text, and it's a place where afterwards it's got middle-class people and homeless people in the same church. A real interesting place. And afterwards, they have this time where the congregation responds. And this guy, his name was Chuck, he said, He said, he jumped up, and he was very enthusiastic. He says, "Yep, that's just what happened to me." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well," he says, "my wife died, and we were together for 40 years, and I was depressed. I missed her so much. Life didn't seem any good to me anymore. I just didn't care about anything. But then I met Wanda over there with her son. You know, see Wanda over there?" I said, "Yep." Well, Wanda didn't have any place to live, she and her son. And I had a big house and spare rooms now, and I thought, well, maybe I'll offer Wanda a place to live for a while until she gets her life together. Here's this kindly old man and this very young woman with a child. And he says, "Okay, Wanda, you can move in and live in my house." And he says, "If you take the homeless into your house," said Chuck, paraphrasing Isaiah, "then you'll get healed. You know, that's just what happened to me." He said, "I just got too busy to be depressed anymore. I had to deal with Wanda and this very energetic little boy. And now we're kind of a family. And she's getting her life together, and you know, she got a job and she could be moving out soon. We'll miss each other, but you know, she should have her own place. That's just what happened to me." Testimonial, says Chuck. Yeah, Isaiah's on to something here. He's on to something here. I did promise that I wasn't going to do an altar call, Neil. I did. You said last night, you said there'll be no altar calls tomorrow. We're not planning anything like that. And I said, maybe you aren't. So I'm really not going to just do one, but I'm going to just tell you about one and finish with that. I'll tell you about one. I guess better, I'll tell you, that's close. I'll tell you about one. I'm in Spokane, Washington. We're doing a youth gang peace summit. All the kids from all the gangs, we've got them together in the room, and these are the young people that this town is terrified of. We've got black gangs and white and Native American and Latino and Asian. All the kids are up there, backward baseball caps and baggy pants and rings and tattoos, and boy, they look scary. And they're up in front, and we got them together with the community, and we had the business people and the police chief and the preachers and the rabbis and the civic leaders. We all were there to listen to each other. And these kids told their stories about how they had fallen through the cracks in Spokane. Every kid told their own story, girls and boys. And what's like living on the streets, and what's happened to them on the streets, and what their aspirations were for what they wanted in life. And I watched community fears turn into community tears when we heard the stories of our children. And at the end, a Presbyterian minister stood up. He was new in town, and he was crying. He said, "What can we do? What can we do?" And this young kid says, backwards baseball cap, he says, "I don't know, man. Let's see. Figure out what you do best and use it." Figure out what you do best and use it. Good altar call. It was great. And that's what happened. They started popping up all over the auditorium. You know? That minister said, "Okay, I'm new in town. I got a big church downtown, but I got no members." Just a big church. "So you say you got nowhere to go in the afternoon? Well, my church, starting tomorrow, is open every afternoon for you all. Maybe you can be my church." Dean of the college stood up and said, "You know, Jim came and spoke at my college yesterday, and he said I should come today, and he didn't know why, and I didn't know why, but now I know why. A lot of you said you wanted to go to college and never were able to do that. I'm leading a tour of my college next Thursday. Any of you who want to do the work and get that GED, that high school equivalent, and do the work to succeed in college, if you want to do it, I'll find a way to get you into my college." Businessman stood up and said, "I got jobs, and I wish I had more workers as smart as you kids are. Some of you want some work?" The drug enforcement guy said, "We're losing the war on drugs in Spokane, and some of you understand what's on the street. Could you help me out?" Cop says, "I want to be in that conversation too. I need some help." Everybody standing up. And then my favorite, though, was a middle-aged woman who stood up and said, I'm not the dean of a college. I don't own a business. I don't have a church. I'm not the police chief. I work at McDonald's. But a lot of you kids said you got no one to talk to. Well, I get a coffee break in the morning and a coffee break in the afternoon. If you come in, I'll buy you a cup of coffee and we'll talk. Principle of partnership is this. Everyone does their share and everyone does what they do best. And we're saying the same things to Mr. Bush and Mr. Gore. You got to figure out what business has to do, what labor can do, what the churches can do, and what government, federal, state, and local has to do. There's no easy, quick fix. It's everybody does their share, and everyone does what they do best. This Faith Works books is just a book about stories about people doing that. Lawyers, doctors, teachers, organizers, everyone figuring out what they do best. That's the altar call. And coming up here isn't the point. Going out there is the point. Going out there is the point. Figure out what you do best, and as the kids said, use it. Call to renewal is that. We got the churches finally together. I said last night to get the Crips and Bloods together, which I had some experience doing, was a lot easier than getting the churches together. But the churches have come together on this issue of poverty. It's called call to renewal, and this is our principle. Then your light will rise like the dawn, and your healing come quickly. You'll be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets to live in. So this is not a sermon telling you about one more thing you have to do. Instead, it offers a vision of how everybody in the community gets more healthy, healed, and whole. And you know what? Some don't get left out, while others just sit there feeling guilty. No, this is a spiritual movement. And in the end, we all get healed. Amen.
Today is the beginning of our stewardship campaign at First Congregational Church. I hope you noticed the banner on the wall. That's our theme. From Ephesians, far more than all we can ask or imagine. As the offering plate is passed today, think of the gifts that are far more than you can ask or imagine, that God has given you, gifts to be shared, gifts of time, talent, and resources. Bring those gifts and yourself to God as we hear Melissa James sing a wonderful song. And as all of you think about those gifts, we also ask that you sign our friendship pad so that we know who's here today. Let's give to God.
Out in the highways and byways of life, many are weary and sad. Carry the sunshine where darkness is rife, making the sorrowing glad. Tell the sweet story of Christ in his love. Tell of his power to forgive. Others will trust him if only you prove true every moment you live. Make me a blessing. Make me a blessing. as 'twas given to you in your need. Love as the Master loved you. Be to the helpless a helper indeed. Unto your mission be true. Make me a blessing. Make me a blessing out of my life. May Jesus shine.